Hello and welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the Rapid Penetrator build, a rogue dungeon eraser that I am super proud of. So, I play exclusively on hardcore, and I was doing the penetrating shot build, and I loved it. It was so amazing. You imbue your shots, you shoot through, the whole pack is dead. But then you come to an elite that's kind of on its own, or the dungeon boss, and you're just dodging around, applying poison imbuement, shooting him like a billion times. It's just not fun. So, I came across a pair of gloves, and I'm going to talk about how I improved these gloves later, because it's actually pretty interesting. I'm going to make a short about it tomorrow, probably. But they had penetrating shot and rapid fire. Now, I've tried rapid fire before, and I just don't think it's a viable main option. It's incredible for deleting elites and bosses. It's a total nuke. But for groups, even when you put the special aspect on that makes it ricochet, it's just way slower than penetrating shot, which can just take out a pack instantly. So, I decided, you know what? Why not drop the poison trap and put on rapid fire, and let's see how this works. And I did a few tweaks to the skill tree. I zeroed in my gear a little bit to fit this. And I'm still mainly focusing on penetrating shot because rapid fire kind of takes care of itself. But as you can see on the screen, my goodness, we absolutely blow through content. And at the end, we're actually 2, maybe 3, shotting the Nightmare Dungeon bosses. The clear potential on this is nuts, and since we're stacking so much movement speed, I can clear most Nightmare Dungeons in less than 5 minutes. And because of the new teleport system, that's leading to insane experience per hour. I got level 50 and put this gear on and tweaked it just the way I wanted it. Within 2 hours, I was level 60. It's crazy. So come with me and we'll go over exactly what you need to make this beast of a build work for you. Alright, so now we're going to get into the build and the aspects that you need to start. The most important one to start with is definitely trick shot. It's going to make it so every time your penetrating shot hits an enemy in a line, it sends branching lines of arrows off. Now, they're going to deal lower damage. As you can see here, the roll isn't great on these gloves. It's 13% where it could be 25%. Some people might put it on their bow, some people might put it on their amulet. It's going to increase the amount of damage that it spreads, but a lot of our damage is coming from imbuements anyway. The actual physical damage doesn't matter too much, it's just the fact that we're spreading those imbuements to as many enemies as possible. That's what we're focusing on. So it's not the end of the world if you have a lower one. And what I do first and foremost is I go around and I collect all the aspects that I consider vital to my build from the dungeons, and that way, you know, you can do the minimum rolls at least and just put it on all your gear early on. I have a set for like level 10 to 15 for if I die because I play hardcore exclusively. So trick shot, incredibly vital, very necessary. The next most important one is going to be Edge Master. Now, I would put this one on your amulet, maybe even your bow or crossbow. As you can see, I'm using a unique, so I can't put it on there. But I'm going to be talking to you about things. This doesn't require uniques. I just really like this one because, I mean, a 13% chance to deal double damage, even though it's just physical damage, and as I said a moment ago, we're focusing mostly on imbuements, it's still nice. Really important defensive ones, we're looking at Disobedience. This is going to give you, as you can see here, 0.30% increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage, stacking up to 30%. Since we're using penetrating shot to take out groups, we're going to be hitting, 20, 30 enemies at a time. So we're pretty much always going to have that 30% of extra armor. That's very nice. For might, we're going to have basic skills grant damage reduction. And this is a really good roll. 20% for 5 seconds. So stacking with the Disobedience, you're gaining a lot of defense just right there. Then we have Umbrus. Now, Umbrus is huge. With Umbrus, we can actually have another ability without having it on our bar. So, Umbrus is right here, and it's Dark Shroud. It surrounds yourself with up to 5 protective shadows, gain 8% damage reduction per active shadow. Each time you take damage, that damage is reduced and the shadow is consumed. Now, when we have this on our gear, every time we critical strike with a marksman skill, and that's one of either of our skills, it's going to give us a shadow. So when we take out huge groups, we're full shadows. Not only that, but it gives us extra movement speed through a couple other things, like we specialized in it. So 10% chance not to be consumed, very nice. And I go with Subverting Dark Shroud, which gives me 4% increased movement speed per shadow. And since we can have 8, that's what, 30%? 32%? So that's a lot of extra movement speed. And for this class, I stack movement speed above anything else. It's just really handy. Speaking of which, for the boots, I go with Wind Striker. So every time we get a critical strike, we get 13% movement speed for 1 second, up to 6 seconds. And again, since we're critting so many people with that penetrating shot, we're dealing a ton of damage. For the rings, we have Corruption, which our imbuement effects have a 38% increased potency against vulnerable enemies. They're almost always vulnerable because we prioritize our shadow imbuement. And as I'll get to in a minute, that makes them vulnerable all the time. Also, we have it so that whenever we use Puncture and hit enemies with at least 2 of them, they're vulnerable as well. So this is going to generate a lot of extra damage. I use Mother's Embrace, just so that core skill damages 5 or more enemies, 30% of the resources refunded. Now, you'll get this from completing the campaign. So if you're not on hardcore, you're pretty much guaranteed to get this unique. It's not very rare. You might get a bad roll, but it's still nice. And this actually isn't super necessary. I've actually considered trading it out because, as you can see, since I used 2 uniques here, I didn't want to leave you hanging. So I would probably use repeating, even though it's not necessary because our rapid fire is almost exclusively for bosses and hardcore elites, like the single target burst damage. That's what's so great about this build. We're mainly focusing on the penetrating shot, which gives us all that damage for groups, and we can just blast them. But when we need to take down a tough enemy, that's what our rapid fire is for. Now, that means that this isn't that necessary because we have penetrating shot, so we don't really need it to go to other enemies. But, you know, it's a pretty good option if you don't have a unique. Also, I would go with Bursting Venoms. Critical strikes with poison and bead skills have a 10% chance to create a toxic pool that deals damage over time. And if you stand in it, your poison imbuement skill has no cooldown and no charge limit, so you can spam it. That's actually a really underrated aspect. And so in the likelihood that you do not have a unique, I would definitely focus on getting Bursting Venoms. And that brings us down here to the Expectant. Now, this is an incredibly important aspect to have as well. I would probably prioritize it pretty early. Attacking enemies with a basic skill increases the damage of your next core skill cast by 5% up to 30. So if you can get this the max roll of 10%, then that means every time you're building combo points, which are also very, very important, you need those combo points. I would say it's the best specialization. Then 1, 2, 3, max combo points, max damage. 30% extra damage every single time. Boom. So good. And then we come to Arrow Storms. Now, a lot of people say that this one, Arrow Storms, is not necessary and is basically useless, but I would beg to differ, because the thing that they don't notice is when you hit an enemy, it has a 10% chance, right? Well, let's say we're hitting a minimum 10 enemies at a time. That means we're going to get at least 1. Now, more often than not, I've found, it feels like it procs more, but it's just because you're hitting so many enemies. So you can have up to 5 active Arrow Storms at once. I can't tell you how many times I've had 3 to 5 Arrow Storms active at any given time. And that's going to be an extra 5,000-6,000 damage over a big area, over the whole group. And it adds up very quickly. I would say this is probably the most underrated of any of the aspects, because you never see anybody running it. I love it. It's my absolute favorite. It's also just really fun to see all those extra damage numbers and everything come up. And the cool thing about it, let's go over here. So as you can see here, I'm using my Codex of Power to put this on, and this came from the Codex of Power originally. So 1690 damage, we're up to 2069 damage. And that's just because it's been like 5 levels since I've done this. So every few levels, you can just come back and re-imprint the aspect for more damage. Because the thing about this one is, if it's direct damage, if it's not a percentage, then it goes up, it scales with your level. So it actually gets better the higher level you get, and it scales really well. And if you happen to get a really good drop with a max roll, just roll with that and it'll last you a long time. Unfortunately, I don't get it very often. So what I end up doing is just overriding it with my Codex of Power. But yeah, those are the aspects that I use. Those are the uniques I use. And again, the uniques are not necessary. So let's get back over to the fountain and we'll jump into the abilities. Alright, so we're getting into our abilities now. So for the first thing, you're going to want Puncture. You're obviously going to enhance it. And you're going to get Fundamental Puncture. That makes 3 blades in a spread. And it makes it so that you can put Vulnerable on anybody you want just by hitting them with at least 2 of the 3 blades. Super handy. I'd say it's by far the best for this. Next up, as you can see, we have Rapid Fire. And we're going to go for Enhanced, obviously, and then Improved. Gain 15 energy per cast when it damages a vulnerable enemy. Things are often vulnerable with us. So I find that to be a little more useful than the 30% increased critical strike damage for 3 seconds after you evade. I'm not focusing on evade too much or dodge. I'm going a lot more for the direct damage. Now, Penetrating Shot. We're going for Advanced Penetrating Shot, so that when we cast it with full energy, it'll slow all enemies it hits by 50%. That'll give us a little bit more time, and also we can focus a little bit on abilities that affect enemies that are slowed or crowd controlled, because that counts as both of those options. It'll also knock down elites and other such for 1.5 seconds. That's actually super helpful, and sometimes if they're a little tougher, then I'll go ahead and knock them down, wait for my imbuement to reset, and then blast them with the Rapid Fire. Now you notice these are both 8 out of 5, which means they're dealing insane amounts of damage. And that's because of these gloves. If you can find gloves that have both Penetrating Shot and Rapid Fire, that is absolutely incredible. That's the god stat for you. Make sure that you look for that. And if you can re-roll it, or if you just find them, hold on to those gloves. They will last you a very long time, because again, these are our main abilities. So strong. These changed the game for me, for sure. But even if you don't have plus to both, they're both really viable. I would probably power up Penetrating Shot over Rapid Fire, because Rapid Fire is so strong anyway, and this is your AoE clear, and it's going to lead to faster dungeon clear times if you amp up the Penetrating Shot before the Rapid Fire, but both is just king. I went ahead and got a little bit of Sturdy for some damage reduction, and Stutter Step, because again, we're focusing entirely on movement speed. So this gives us a crazy amount of movement speed constantly, and we're going to stack that with a few other abilities. Come down here, we've skipped pretty much everything, but I went ahead and got Weapon Mastery, so that bows deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies. I focus on bows for now just because I have the unique, but you know, crossbows deal increased critical strike damage is also good, and crossbows are generally better than bows because of the vulnerable damage. So having this kind of makes up for that, because I get a little bit more bonus to vulnerable damage. So bows have damage to distant enemies, and that's a flat, that's a plus, whereas vulnerable is multiplicative, and it can really add up quickly. Coming down here, we obviously need 1 rank of Dark Shroud to work with our Umbrous aspect. And then we're going for Enhanced and Subverting. Each active Dark Shroud increases your movement speed by 4. So that adds up super fast. That's, as we said earlier, 32% extra movement speed right there when we have all 8 shadows. I go for Concealment, which makes you unstoppable. I'd say you need at least 1 unstoppable, and I prefer Concealment to Shadow Step personally. It's just, I find it more useful all around, and it also gives you some energy if you're running low. Gives you some more movement speed too. And I went ahead and got the Enhanced because of the energy, as I said a moment ago, and I did not bother to get one of these because I'm not really using it to make enemies vulnerable. I already had that with Penetrating Shot, and I'm not really using it for the extra critical strike either. This is my get out of jail free card. I went ahead and did Exploit, which is increased damage to healthy enemies, and quite often we're one-shotting enemies, so that's basically just a flat 18% damage. Then I went ahead and got Malice. You deal 9% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. We are focusing on making enemies vulnerable as much as possible. So that's pretty important. And then we come down to here. Now we have Shadow and Poison Imbuement maxed out. Very important. And I went ahead and got, for Shadow, its primary explosion makes enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. Very important. I'd say this is probably the most important one to do. It's way more important than taking increased non-physical damage because they're already going to be dying so quickly. For Poison Imbuement, I went ahead and gave it Blended, which makes critical strikes with poison-imbued skills deal 75% increased poisoning damage, and we have this amped up, so it's dealing 204% of their base damage. Now you may be wondering how I have a +3 in both of these. It's because I got really lucky again, not just with my gloves, but with my helmet. I actually got this today. And it has +3 ranks of Shadow Imbuement and +3 ranks of Poison Imbuement. Incredibly important. If you only look for one stat, look for the Shadow Imbuement. Way more important, as I say before, because Rapid Fire already takes down single targets so well. You don't need to focus too much, and Poison Imbuement is more your Rapid Fire Imbuement, in my personal opinion. You do shift between them equally for groups, because sometimes Shadow is on cooldown. But for the most part, I focus on Poison Imbuement for my Rapid Fire. So I think it's really important to have extra Shadow Imbuement. But if you can get both, my goodness, it is so very nice. And at the end game, that should be your focus, getting both of those +3. Let's go back down. And I went ahead and got Precision Imbuement. Imbued skills gain 9% increased critical strike chance. Almost all of our stuff is going to be imbued. So that is super important as well. I got Adrenaline Rush, basically just to get down below. Moving, you gain 5% increased energy regeneration. It is nice, but I don't need to max it out. And then Haste. While at or above 50% maximum energy, you gain 15% increased movement speed. That's the main thing we're focusing on. While below 50%, gain 15% increased attack speed. Now, attack speed is meh. It's not a big deal. But the movement speed, we're stacking so much movement speed with this that we're probably running, after we kill an elite, at least three times normal speed, I would say. It's absolutely crazy how quickly you can clear dungeons with this. So you just run past packs, turn around, shoot a Shadow Imbued penetrating shot, blast them all, keep moving. You just keep moving, keep moving. You can clear so quickly with this build. It's absolutely crazy and far superior to the standard classic penetrating shot build, because the boss deletion, my god, it is insane. You'll two-shot Nightmare Elite bosses, the Nightmare Dungeon bosses. You'll two-shot them a lot of times. It's just crazy. This is from gear. I didn't actually get it, but it is quite nice. After moving 50 meters, your next attack deals 7% increased damage. Now, I would like this maxed out, but I ran out of points. Because using double core does eat up a lot of your skill points. Also using double imbue uses up a lot of your skill points. But I think that those points are better spent in those aspects than having this, even though I think this is truly important. And also keep in mind that I have the first 3 in every zone for the Renown. And what that's going to do is it makes it so that when I create a new character on Hardcore, or anything, even on Eternal, you're going to have an extra 10 points. So you'll be level 1 with 10 skill points. And that's going to give you a huge boost up. In addition to the Statue of Lilith, which I have all the statues of Lilith. That's going to be an extra, I think you start at 75 with everything, so I think it's an extra 68 in all intelligence, dexterity, strength, etc. So that really gives you a boost early on, but the main thing it does is it gives you just 10 extra skill points, period, because they stop at level 50. So getting those done is very important. If you do all the strongholds and you knock out the altars of Lilith, or just do dungeons, if you don't want to do the altars, I get it, you don't want to do the altars, it's a pain in the ass. It's worth it, especially in Hardcore. But if you really don't want to do it, just do a few dungeons, you'll get tier 3 no problem. Getting tier 5 is actually really hard. It's a grind, but the Paragon points are worth it as well. But they're not as important as the skill points. And it's also a lot harder to do. So just focus on getting those extra skill points and you'll be good. Let's finish this out. I went with precision. So critical strikes with marksman skills grant you precision. You gain 4% increased critical strike damage per stack up to 20%. When you reach it, your next marksman skill is guaranteed critical strike that deals 40% increased critical strike damage and consumes all stacks. I think that is by far the best. Exposure is also... See, we don't use trap skills. Yeah, so this is basically just the best one for this build, and there's really nothing else. These two are more for melee. So you might have 10 points less than me. So what I would do in that situation is I would go ahead and get rid of these. Get rid of haste and adrenaline rush. Go ahead and drop precision imbuement and drop 2 points from exploit and a point or 2 from malice, and that should get you where you need to be. But I would focus on getting those first 3 renown in each zone. It's not that hard. You're going to need to get the strongholds anyway to be able to unlock some of the nightmare dungeons, and I think it's a great use of your time. It'll also break things up a little bit. So renown grind is not as bad as it seems, and the rewards are just so very worth it. Moving on to the Paragon board, I'm not too far into this, but I'll show you what I did. I went up the right side to go ahead and get that extra damage. That 20% extra damage there, and then these nodes here. Very, very nice, very important. The first glyph I went with is Infusion, and I would try to get this one because I think it's the best early on. It's going to give every 5 intelligence purchase within range. Skills that are imbued deal 4.8% increased damage. Almost all of our skills are going to be imbued. So I think this is by far the best glyph to start with. With how many you have in the initial area, that's going to give you 25.7% imbued skill damage. And also, you reach the extra additional bonus. Casting an imbuement skill reduces active cooldown of another random imbuement by 0.5 seconds. So there's this synergy where you're constantly reducing the cooldown of the other one. And it makes it so that you can imbue your skills even faster and move through the dungeon even quicker. I went through the damage on this side too, and it's just crazy how much that helps right off the bat. For the next board, I went for Exploit Weakness board. Whenever you damage a vulnerable enemy, they take 1% multiplicative. Increased damage from you for up to 6 seconds, up to 15%. We're dealing a lot of damage to a lot of vulnerable enemies. We're going to have that stacked pretty well. I'm going for the Hunter Killer, which is damage to elites and even more movement speed. So, man, you wouldn't believe how much I'm flying. The magic nodes also here, additional movement speed and additional damage to elites. So we're absolutely deleting them with our rapid fire and just flying past, slamming everybody else with our penetrating shot, and the clear speed is absolutely crazy. And then our next board, the glyph that we should be using and leveling, is going to be Ranger. Now, this is going to give us another huge boost to damage, and you could even do it before the other one if you really want to, and you get one before the other. This is going to do, for every 5 dexterity purchase within range, marksman skills deal 1.3% increased damage. Both of our core abilities are marksman skills, rapid fire and penetrating shot. So this is going to give us just flat damage increase. Also, the additional bonus, while wielding ranged weapons, take 10% reduced damage. That's going to add up quite a bit as well, because we almost always have that in our hands unless we're using our basic skill, at which point we pull out our swords and or daggers. So definitely use these two. You're going to use imbued skill damage, Infusion, or you're going to use Ranger. One of those two. And then finally, we're going to look at our specialization. As I said earlier, combo points are king. They're by far the best option. And the reason is your basic skills now generate combo points. Core skills consume combo points for additional effects. Let's look at what those effects are. So for rapid fire, it's going to deal at 3 points, 5,000 damage. That's 71% increased damage, and shoot 8 arrows instead of 5. So that's absolutely crazy. Then we go over to penetrating shot, and it's actually going to do 2 things. It's going to increase our damage dramatically, and since this is an AoE clear ability, that is absolutely crazy how much damage you're cranking out with this. You're dealing 226% extra damage if you have it 8 out of 5. That's nuts. So you're also getting 30% lucky hit chance, which in our case, I believe that it counts for wind force here. So lucky hits with this weapon have a 13% chance to deal double damage and knock back the target. That's going to help that as well. So all of your lucky hit chances increased as well when you use penetrating shot along with combo points. So there's just nothing better for. So kind of a long video, but I feel like I covered all the bases. I hope that it helped you out, and I hope that you enjoyed this build, because I certainly am. I'll keep you updated as I level up, and I'm pretty confident that I'm not going to die. So when I hit 70, 80, 90, 100, I'll do some update videos, things I've learned, things that maybe you should change, gear upgrades that you can do, things like that. And in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night.